Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, Founder Stories, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation of history's most visionary founders. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these trailblazers. Now, let's meet our guest. Today, we are sitting down with an absolute giant of the food industry. A man who transformed the way the world eats, markets, and thinks about food safety. Welcome to the show, Henry Heinz.
Thank you so much, Calvin.
We are thrilled to have you, Henry. Let's start at the very beginning of your vision. When you first conceived of your food processing business, the world was a very different place. Most people grew their own food or bought unbranded goods from bulk barrels. What was the exact moment you realized society was moving in a direction only you could see? And how did you convince the early skeptics?
It goes back to my boyhood in Sharpsburg, Pennsylvania, helping my mother tend her garden. By the time I was a teenager, I was growing, grinding, and bottling horseradish. In those days, horseradish bought at the market was a risky gamble. Dishonest producers would grind up turnips, wood filler, or old leaves and hide the whole mess inside dark green or brown glass bottles, so the consumer couldn't see the deception until they got home. I realized that as people moved into cities and away from their own farms, they would crave convenience, but they would desperately need trust. I decided to sell my pure horseradish in clear glass bottles. People told me it was foolish, that clear glass was more expensive and exposed the food to light. But I knew that if people could see the purity of my product with their own eyes, the skeptics would become customers. Honesty was our finest marketing tool.
That focus on transparency is incredible, especially for that era. Leaving behind safety to build something entirely unproven is a massive gamble, though. What did your life look like the day you decided to go all in, and what was the core belief that gave you the courage to take that first step?
In 1869, I was 25 years old and newly married to my wonderful Sarah. I had actually been working in my father's brick manufacturing business and had even become a partner there. It was a safe, reliable livelihood. The day I decided to leave the brickyards and go all in on food packing with my friend Clarence Noble, my hands were still calloused from brickwork, but my mind was in the garden. My core belief was simple, rooted deeply in what my consecrated mother taught me: do a common thing uncommonly well. I believed that if we brought absolute cleanliness, superior taste, and unwavering integrity to commercial food, we could ease the burden of the overworked housewife and elevate the standard of the American table. That faith gave me the courage to jump.
Do a common thing uncommonly well. That is a motto to live by. In the absolute beginning, when you had no data, no capital, and no blueprint, what was the one truth you held onto that everyone else around you dismissed?
The truth I held onto was that the reputation of the manufacturer matters just as much as the product itself. In the mid-19th century, most food manufacturers were completely anonymous to the public. Grocers sold items out of generic barrels, and no one knew whose name stood behind the quality. People dismissed my idea of heavily branding every single item with our family name and maintaining a strict, uniform standard across different products. They thought a pickle was just a pickle, and vinegar was just vinegar. But I knew that a trusted name would create a lifelong bond with the consumer. I knew that the name Heinz could become a guarantee of purity.
It certainly did. But the road wasn't entirely smooth. Long before your company became a household name, you hit a wall where everything nearly collapsed. Take us back to that first major failure. What went wrong? And how did you find the willpower to restart?
Calvin, it was a devastating time. By 1875, our original partnership, Heinz Noble and Company, was thriving. We had over 160 acres of farmland, dozens of horses, and facilities in multiple cities. But then the prolonged economic devastation of the Panic of 1873 caught up with us. We had contracted to buy a massive yield of horseradish at a fixed price, and when the market crashed, the price dropped to almost nothing. We couldn't meet our obligations and were forced into bankruptcy. I lost everything. It was a crushing blow to my pride and my pocketbook. But my willpower came from my faith and my family. On New Year's Day in 1876, I sat down with my brother John my cousin Frederick, and my wife Sarah. We resolved to start anew. Because I was legally bankrupt, the new business, F&J Heinz, had to be in their names, and I worked on a modest salary to manage it. We introduced a new product called tomato ketchup to the line, put our heads down, and worked our way out of the ashes.
Innovation often looks like madness to contemporaries. Was there a specific product, philosophy, or strategy you were utterly convinced would work, but the public initially rejected or ridiculed? How did you respond?
My strategy for employee welfare was heavily criticized by other industrialists of my time. When we built our grand factory in Pittsburgh, I insisted on providing dining rooms, a roof garden, a library, free medical care, and even a pipe organ for our workers, many of whom were young women. My peers in big business thought I was sentimental and foolishly wasting capital on luxuries for factory hands. They predicted it would ruin our margins. I responded, not with arguments, but by showing them the results. Our factory floor was immaculate, our workers were fiercely loyal, and our productivity soared. I always maintained that heart power is better than horsepower.
That is a beautiful way to look at leadership. Behind the legendary name was a human being facing immense pressure, whether from financial panics, internal betrayal, or personal doubt. How did you shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter?
The weight can be heavy, especially when thousands of livelihoods depend on your decisions. When the pressure mounted, I turned directly to my faith. I would often think of the teachings of the Bible and remind myself that I was merely a steward of these resources. I also found immense strength in my home life, with Sarah and our children. Separating the noise of the business world from the peace of a Christian home allowed me to keep my center, so that when I walked through the factory gates, my vision remained clear and my temper remained steady.
Let's talk about the people who helped you build this empire. Who were the very first people, beyond your immediate family, to buy into what you were doing? How did you convince early workers or customers to trust an entirely unproven concept?
Aside from my early partner Clarence Noble, our first true believers were the local grocers of Pittsburgh and the surrounding boroughs. In the very beginning, I would carry my clear bottles of horseradish in a handbasket, walking door to door to show them the product. I didn't convince them with clever sales pitches. I convinced them by letting them sample it right there on the spot. I let them see that there were no turnips mixed in, and that our vinegar was perfectly clear. Once those local grocers realized their own customers were coming back specifically asking for my horseradish, their trust was locked in.
Can you take us to the exact moment where you felt the momentum shift? What was the specific milestone, contract, or breakthrough where you realized we aren't just going to survive, we are going to change everything?
The great turning point came in 1886. I was on a family vacation in Europe, and I decided to bring a sample case of our products to the grand food buyers at Fortnum & Mason in London. They were the grocers to the British royalty, accustomed to the finest delicacies in the world. I walked in, introduced our American goods, and they bought the entire inventory on the spot. I remember writing down a conviction that stayed with me forever. Our field is the world. That was the moment I realized we weren't just a successful Pittsburgh company. We were going to change the way the entire globe consumed packaged foods. Shortly after that, in 1888, I was able to buy out my partners and reorganize the business as the H.J. Heinz Company.
Our field is the world. That is incredibly ambitious, and you achieved it. You didn't just build a company, you built a distinct culture and philosophy that outlasted you. In the early days, when it was just a handful of people in a room, how did you instill that standard of excellence or service?
By being right there on the line with them. In the early days, I wasn't sitting away in a fancy corporate office. I was in the fields checking the crops. I was looking at the sorting tables, and I was inspecting the cleanliness of the machinery. You cannot preach a standard of excellence if you do not model it. I made sure every worker knew that a single bad pickle or a contaminated jar of ketchup could ruin the reputation we worked so hard to build. We taught them to take personal pride in the label.
History books often flatten a person's life into a neat, polished narrative. What is the biggest misconception people have about your journey, your character, or how your company was actually built?
Many people look at our famous slogan, 57 varieties, which I created in 1896, and they assume it was a literal count of our inventory. The truth is, we were already manufacturing more than 60 distinct products at that time. I was riding on a train in New York and saw an advertisement for a shoe company that mentioned 21 styles. I found the concept so incredibly memorable. When I started thinking of a number for us, the number 7 kept coming to mind because of its psychological power and its spiritual significance. 57 just sounded right. It wasn't a mathematical calculation, it was a stroke of marketing genius that captured the public's imagination.
That is a fantastic piece of history. Building an empire always requires a steep personal cost, though. Looking back at the entirety of your life, what was the hardest sacrifice you had to make for the sake of your vision? And was it ultimately worth it?
The hardest sacrifice was undoubtedly the time away from my beloved family during our heaviest years of global expansion. Traveling across the country and overseas to establish our salting stations, factories, and sales agencies meant spending weeks and months away from home. In 1894, my dear Sarah passed away from pneumonia, and the realization of how precious and fleeting our time together had been weighed heavily on my heart. My business success could never replace her. But looking at the legacy, knowing that we created an honest company that provided secure, dignified livelihoods for thousands of workers and safe food for millions of families, I can say that the work itself was a worthy calling.
Thank you for sharing that, Henry. If you could send a single sentence back through time to yourself on the very first day you started this venture, knowing every trial, triumph, and heartbreak that awaited you, what would you say?
I would tell my younger self, place your trust entirely in God, guard your integrity like your life depends on it, and remember that absolute honesty with the public will always yield the greatest return.
Henry, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before we sign off?
I only want to say that no matter how much the world changes or how advanced your technologies become, the fundamental rules of human nature and business never alter. If you treat your workers with genuine kindness and give your customers a product that is exactly what you claim it to be, you will build something that endures. Thank you again, Calvin, for this marvelous conversation. It has been an honor.
What an absolute masterclass in business, branding, and integrity. From selling homegrown horseradish in clear glass bottles to building a global empire on the foundation of trust and employee welfare, Henry Heinz truly showed us what it means to do a common thing uncommonly well. Thank you so much, Henry, for coming on the show and sharing your journey with us. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast, Founder Stories. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.